Cale's shovel struck something that wasn't ice. The metallic clang echoed through the storm as he dropped to his knees, brushing away snow with bare hands that had long since gone numb. What he found made his heart slam against his ribs a pale. Hand, fingers curled like a dying flower, protruding from what should have been an empty drift. No, 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 he muttered, digging frantically. The blizzard had been raging for 3 days, and he'd been the only fool stupid enough to venture out to his grandfather's abandoned cabin. Now someone else had paid the price for the mountains. Cruelty. Her face emerged next, high cheekbones dusted with ice crystals, lips blue as Arctic steel. She was beautiful in the way that broken things could be beautiful, and completely, utterly still. Cale pressed his ear to her chest, listening. Past the howling wind, there a whisper of a heartbeat, so faint he might have imagined it. He scooped her up, surprised by how light she felt, how fragile. Her head lolled against his shoulder as he carried her toward the cabin, fighting through snow that reached his thighs. She wore only a thin sweater and jeans, as if she'd simply walked into a blizzard without a care in the world. The cabin's door stuck, warped by moisture and neglect. Cale kicked it open, carrying her to the dusty couch near the fireplace. Her skin was marble cold, her breathing so shallow it barely fogged the air. He'd pulled enough bodies from avalanches to know she was minutes from death. His hand shook as he built the fire, coaxing flames from dry kindling his grandfather had left years ago. The warmth felt foreign against his own frozen skin. He turned back to her. She was watching him with eyes the color of storm clouds, conscious, aware, and completely unafraid. "You're alive," he said, relief flooding through him. She sat up slowly, studying him with unsettling calm. "You dug me out. I thought you were dead. How long were you under there?" Lyrian, that was her name, she told him, later tilted her head, as if the question required deep consideration. "Time moves differently in the cold. I was... sleeping." There was something about the way she said it that made Cale's skin crawl. Not sleeping like unconsciousness, but sleeping like choice, like she'd curled up in that snowdrift and decided to let the mountain take her. Why? The question escaped before he could stop it. She stood, testing her legs like a newborn deer. Her clothes should have been soaked through, but they were merely damp. Her skin should have been frostbitten, but it was already warming to a healthy pink, because I was tired of feeling nothing. Cale had been alone on this mountain for 6 months, running from his own ghosts. He'd come here to die if he was being honest, not dramatically, but quietly, letting the isolation and cold do what he couldn't bring himself to do. Now this strange woman was looking at him like she understood something about him that he'd never spoken aloud. "The storm won't break for days," he said. "Tut." She moved to the window, pressing her palm against the frosted glass. "I wasn't ready to go back to the world anyway." Outside, the wind screamed its fury, trapping them together in a place where neither had expected to find anyone else. Cale watched her profile in the firelight and felt something he'd thought was dead stirring in his chest, not attraction. Exactly, but recognition. She was running from something too. The cabin became their world. Cale cooked canned soup on the wood stove, while Lyrian sorted through his grandfather's books, her fingers tracing titles with reverent care. She read voraciously, as if consuming stories could fill some deep hunger inside her. "What were you before?" he asked on the second day, watching her devour a volume of poetry. "Before what?" "Before you decided to sleep in the snow." She set the book down carefully. "I was a nurse. I see you. I held dying people's hands for 12 years. Her voice was matter-of-fact, but her eyes held depth he couldn't fathom. "Do you know what it's like to watch someone's last breath leave their body? To feel their hand go slack in yours?" Cale didn't know. He'd been a paramedic in Denver before the accident that killed his partner and shattered his faith in saving lives. It changes you. It hollows you out. I started to feel like I was dying a little with each of them, till one day I realized I was already dead. I just hadn't stopped moving yet." They were sitting by the fire, sharing a bottle of whiskey Cale had found in his grandfather's stash. The alcohol burned, but it was a clean burn, honest and warming. Lyrian's cheeks were flushed, her storm-gray eyes bright with reflected flames. "You walked into a blizzard?" "I drove as far as the road would take me, then walked. I thought I thought maybe the cold would make me feel something again, even if it was just pain. Cale understood. He'd come to the mountains seeking his own form of erasure, not death, exactly, but disappearance. A slow fade into irrelevance. Did it work? She looked at him then, really looked at him. Not until you dug me out. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Cale had spent months building walls around, his heart convincing himself that isolation was safety. But Lyrian looked at him like he was still human, still worth saving. I killed my partner, he said suddenly. The words came out raw, unplanned. The traffic stop went wrong. I froze. Because I couldn't move? You didn't kill him. I might as well have. Lyrian moved closer on the couch, close enough that he could smell her skin clean somehow, despite everything. I lost a patient last month, a little girl, 7 years old. Leukemia. I'd been taking care of her for months. And when she died, her mother asked me if I thought she was in heaven. She paused, swallowing hard. I told her yes, but I didn't believe it. I couldn't feel anything. Not sadness, not hope, not even anger. Just ... nothing. They sat in silence, watching the fire consume itself. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, something was shifting. The weight of their confession settled between them like a cornerstone, not light, but solid. Something to build on. I haven't felt anything real in 2 years, Cale said quietly. I haven't felt anything real in longer than that. Lyrian's hand found his in the darkness between them. Her fingers were warm now, alive with circulation and purpose. When she squeezed gently, Cale felt something crack open inside his chest, not breaking, but opening, like ice giving way to spring. Maybe, she said, we can remember together. On the third day, Lyrian found his grandfather's journal hidden behind a loose floorboard. She read passages aloud while Cale repaired the cabin's broken shutters, her voice giving life to words written decades ago by a man who'd understood loneliness. Listen to this, she said, sitting cross-legged on the floor like a child. The mountain doesn't judge, it simply exists, and in existing, it reminds us that we exist too. Pain is proof of life, but so is healing. Both require the courage too. Feel. Cale paused in his work. He was a philosopher, my grandfather. Drove my father crazy. He was right, though. Lyrian closed the journal, holding it against her chest. I'd forgotten that healing was an option. I thought I was broken permanently. Aren't we all? She stood, moving to where he knelt by the window. Maybe, but broken doesn't mean useless. Sometimes, the cracks are where the light gets in. Her hand touched his shoulder, and the contact sent electricity through him. It's not just attraction, though that was there too, but something deeper. Recognition, hope, the dangerous, terrifying possibility that he might be worth saving after all. Lyrian, he said, her name feeling foreign and familiar on his tongue. I know. She knelt beside him, and suddenly they were close enough that he could count the flecks of silver in her gray eyes. I feel it too. When she kissed him, it was like coming back to life. Not the desperate, drowning kiss of people trying to forget, but the slow, reverent kiss of people trying to remember. Her lips were soft and warm, and when she sighed against his mouth, Cale felt something inside him ignite. They made love on the rug in front of the fire, surrounded by the detritus of their makeshift life, empty soup cans, discarded books, the tools of survival. But it wasn't desperate or frantic. It was careful, exploratory. The slow rediscovery of what it meant to be human. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin warm against skin, listening to the storm outside. Cale traced patterns on Lyrian's shoulder, marveling at the way she shivered under his touch. When had he last made someone shiver? When had he last wanted to? I was going to die here, he said into the darkness. Before I found you, I mean. Not dramatically, just ... stop trying. I know, her voice was soft against his chest. I felt, and when you dug me out, the resignation, it's what drew me to you. That's a hell of a foundation for a relationship. She laughed, and the sound was like water over stones. Clear, musical, alive. Is that what this is? A relationship? Cale considered the question. 3 days ago, he'd been a ghost haunting an empty cabin. Now he was holding a woman who'd chosen to sleep in the snow, and somehow they'd found warmth together. I don't know what this is, but I don't want it to end. The storm will break eventually. I know. We'll have to leave this place. I know. Lyrian propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the firelight. What happens then? It was the question they'd both been avoiding. The cabin was a sanctuary, a place outside the normal world where broken people could find each other. But real life waited beyond the storm, full of responsibilities and expectations, and the weight of who they'd been before. I don't know, Cale said honestly. But I know I don't want to go back to being dead. Neither do I. She kissed him again, and this time there was promise in it. Not just for tonight, but for tomorrow. For the possibility that two people could save each other, even when they'd given up on saving themselves. The storm broke on the fourth day with a violence that shook the cabin walls. Cale woke to Lyrian's absence and the sound of the front door, slamming in the wind. He found her standing in the doorway, fully dressed, staring out at the world that had suddenly become accessible again. "You're leaving," he said. Not a question. "The road will be clear by noon." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she pulled on her coat. "I should go, should or want to." She didn't answer, and that silence carved through him like a blade. Cale had known this moment would come, had felt it approaching like a storm front, but knowing didn't make it hurt less. 3 days, he said. "We had 3 days, and now you're running." "I'm not running." She still wouldn't look at him. "I'm being practical." Hell, this was ... This was beautiful, Cale, but it wasn't real. Hell, it wasn't. He stepped closer, and she finally turned to face him. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her jaw was set with familiar determination. "What we found here was a fantasy, snow globe. Pretty to look at, but not meant for the real world. You're scared." "Of course I'm scared." The words burst out of her like a dam breaking. "I'm terrified." "Do you know what it's like to feel nothing for months, and then suddenly feel everything? It's overwhelming. It's too much." Cale understood. The intensity of what had grown between them in this isolated place felt too big for ordinary life. But that didn't make it less real. So we take it slow. We figure it out together. What if we can't? What if this only works here in this bubble? We've created, then we find out. We don't run away without trying. Lyrian closed her eyes, and when she opened them, the tears had spilled over. "I watched a man die yesterday. In my dreams. Yeah, I keep seeing their faces. All the patients I couldn't save. What if I go back to that place? What if I lose this feeling again?" "Then I'll dig you out," Cale said simply, "however many times it takes." The words hung between them like a promise. Lyrian's breath caught, and for a moment Cale thought she might stay. But then she shook her head, backing toward the door. "I can't ask you to do that. I can't ask you to save me. You're not asking. I'm offering, Cale. I love you." The words came out raw, unpolished, but true. "I know it's crazy. I know it's only been 3 days. But I love you, and I'm not giving up on us without a fight." She stared at him, and for a heartbeat. He saw the woman who'd made love to him by the fire, who'd read poetry aloud and traced patterns on his skin. But then the walls came back up, and she was the stranger he dug out of the snow again. "I have to go," she whispered, and she did. Cale watched from the window as she walked down the mountain path, her figure growing smaller against the pristine white landscape. The sun was shining for the first time in days, making the snow sparkle like diamonds. It was beautiful and terrible, and completely empty without her. He stood there until she disappeared around the bend, then sank into the chair by the fire. The cabin felt enormous without her presence, echoing with memories of laughter and whispered confessions. 3 days. They'd had 3 days to remember what it meant to be alive, and now she was walking away from it. But Cale had meant what he said. He'd spent 2 years being dead, and Lyrian had shown him what it felt like to breathe again. He wasn't going back to that gray existence, not without a fight. He began packing his things, planning his descent from the mountain. If she thought she could run from what they'd found together, she was wrong. He'd dug her out of the snow once. He could do it again. Cale found her 3 weeks later in Denver, working the night shift at Presbyterian St. Joseph. He'd spent days tracking her down, calling hospitals, following dead ends. When he finally saw her through the ICU window, his heart nearly stopped. She looked exactly as she had before, gray eyes focused, capable hands checking monitors, the same quiet competence that had drawn him to her. But there was something different too, a spark that hadn't been there before they'd met. She was alive in a way she hadn't been, even if she was trying to hide it. He waited until her shift ended at 7 a.m., then followed her to the parking garage. She saw him coming and stopped, her shoulders tensing. "You can't be here," she said, without turning around. "I'm here anyway." She faced him then, and the sight of her hit him like a physical blow. 3 weeks felt like 3 years. "Cale, please, don't make this harder than it has to be. How's it been these past 3 weeks?" "Fine, normal. I'm working. I'm functioning. Are you sleeping?" The question caught her off guard. A flush crept up her neck. "That's not relevant. Are you dreaming? About dead patients again? Stop. Are you feeling anything, Lyrian? Or did you go back to being numb the moment you left that cabin?" She pressed her hands to her temples, and he could see the exhaustion in her posture. "You don't understand. I can't do this. I can't be with someone and then lose them. I can't survive that kind of pain again. Who says you're going to lose me? Everyone leaves. Everyone dies. That's what I learned doing this job." She gestured toward the hospital. "Love is just delayed grief." Cale stepped closer, and she didn't back away. "You're right. Everyone dies. But that's not what this is about, is it? You're not afraid of losing me. You're afraid of living. That's not. You chose to sleep in that snowdrift because feeling nothing was easier than feeling everything. But I dug you out, and for 3 days, you remembered what it was like to be human. Now you're trying to bury yourself again, but this time in work and routine and the safe, predictable numbness of a life half-lived." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. "Hurts too much, I know." He reached out, cupping her face in his hands. "But the alternative is worse. I've tried it. Spent 2 years being dead and it's not living. It's just ... existing, waiting for the end. What if we can't make it work? What if we're too broken? Then we're broken together. But we try. We fight for it. We don't give up before we even begin." She leaned into his touch, and he felt some of the tension leave her body. "I missed you," she whispered. "Every day. I kept thinking about the way you looked at me by the fire like I was worth saving. You are worth saving. So am I. That's what we learned up there, not that we're perfect, but that we're worth the effort. The cabin was easy. This is harder. Everything worth having is hard." She kissed him then, right there in the parking garage, with the smell of exhaust and the sound of the city waking up around them. It was different from their kisses in the cabin, more desperate, more real. This was a kiss between two people, choosing each other despite the risks, despite the uncertainty. When they broke apart, she was smiling through her tears. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be in love without being terrified. Neither do I. But we'll figure it out together. What if I have nightmares again? What if I shut down? Then I'll be there. I'll dig you out, however many times it takes." She laughed, and the sound was like spring after a long winter. "You keep saying that, because I mean it. I'm not going anywhere, Lyrian. Not without you." They took it slow. Cale found an apartment across town and a job with the fire department, not as a paramedic, but as a trainer, teaching new recruits how to save lives without losing themselves in the process. Lyrian kept her job at the hospital, but switched to day shifts, claiming she needed more sunlight. Their first real fight happened on a Tuesday. Lyrian had lost a patient, an elderly man, who'd reminded her of her grandfather, and she'd come home to Cale's apartment, silent and withdrawn. When he'd tried to comfort her, she'd lashed out, accusing him of not understanding her pain. "You don't get it," she'd said, pacing his living room like a caged animal. "You hold people's hands during training sessions. I watch them die. I've watched people die too. Not like this. Not every day. Not with their families asking you to perform miracles you can't perform." Cale had felt the old familiar urge to withdraw, to build walls and protect himself from her pain. But instead, he'd stayed. He'd sat on the couch and waited for the storm to pass, and eventually, she'd collapsed beside him, crying into his chest. "I'm sorry," she'd whispered. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how to do this without hurting you. You're not hurting me. You're sharing your pain with me. There's a difference. Is there? Yes, hurting me would be shutting me out. This is letting me in." It became their pattern. Lyrian would have bad days when the weight of her job felt unbearable, when she'd look at Cale like he was a stranger. But instead of running, she'd talk. She'd tell him about the patients she'd lost, the families she'd comforted, the guilt that gnawed at her when she couldn't save everyone. Cale had his own demons. Some mornings he'd wake up thinking about Marcus, his dead partner, and the guilt would be so overwhelming he could barely breathe. On those days, Lyrian would hold him while he cried, her hands steady and warm against his skin. "It's not your fault," she'd whisper, and slowly he began to believe her. They developed rituals. Sunday mornings were for hiking, finding small mountains they could climb together. Wednesday evenings were for cooking elaborate meals that usually ended in disaster and laughter. Friday nights were for dancing badly in Cale's living room to music from the radio. "You're a terrible dancer," Lyrian told him one evening, laughing as he stepped on her feet for the third time. "You're not exactly graceful yourself. I'm a nurse, not a ballerina. I'm a firefighter, not Fred Astaire." They were both terrible dancers, but they danced anyway, holding each other in the middle of his small apartment while snow fell outside the windows. It wasn't the dramatic romance of movies, but it was real. It was theirs. 6 months after the cabin, Lyrian moved in with him. She brought her books and her plants and her collection of vintage medical equipment that she'd inherited from her grandmother. The apartment felt smaller with her things in it, but also more complete. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, standing in the doorway with a box of her belongings. "I've been sure since the day I dug you out of the snow, even when I'm difficult, especially when you're difficult." She set down the box and kissed him, and Cale marveled at how different this felt from their desperate kisses in the cabin. This was the kiss of two people who'd chosen each other not in a moment of crisis, but in the quiet, ordinary moments of daily life. "I love you," she said against his lips. "I love you too." And they meant it. Not the desperate, clinging love of people afraid to be alone, but the steady, enduring love of people who'd found their way back to life together. 2 years later, Cale proposed on the anniversary of the blizzard. He'd driven them back to the cabin, which he'd bought from his grandfather's estate and spent months restoring. The structure was the same, but everything else had changed. New windows, fresh paint, a kitchen that actually worked. "You brought me back to where it all started," Lyrian said, standing in the doorway with tears in her eyes. "I brought you back to where we both learned to live again." The ring was simpler silver band with a small diamond that caught the light like ice crystals. He'd been carrying it for weeks, waiting for the right moment. But standing here in the place where they'd first touched each other's hearts, he knew there would never be a more perfect time. "Lyrian Voss," he said, dropping to one knee in front of the fireplace where they'd first made love. "Will you marry me?" She said yes, through tears and laughter. And when she kissed him, it tasted like snow and possibility and the promise of all the tomorrows they'd choose to face together. The wedding was small, just close friends and family gathered in the cabin's great room. Lyrian wore a simple white dress that made her look like she was glowing from within. Cale wore his grandfather's suit, altered to fit his broader frame. "Do you, Cale Brennan, take Lyrian to be your wife?" the minister asked. "I do, die. And I promise to dig you out, however many times it takes." Lyrian laughed, wiping away tears. "Do you, Lyrian Voss, take Cale to be your husband?" "I do, and I promise to help you remember what it means to be alive." They exchanged rings with shaking hands, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in cheers. But all Cale could see was Lyrian's face, radiant with joy and love and the quiet confidence of someone who'd found her place in the world. Later, after the guests had gone home and they were alone, in the cabin, they sat by the fire holding hands. The same fire where they'd first opened their hearts to each other, where they'd learned that broken people could heal each other if they were brave enough to try. "Any regrets?" Cale asked, stroking his thumb across her wedding ring. Only that. We wasted so much time being afraid. We weren't ready before. Oh, I suppose we weren't. We had to lose ourselves completely before we could find each other. Outside, snow began to fall, not the violent blizzard that had brought them together, but a gentle, peaceful snow that blanketed the world in quiet beauty. They watched it through the window, two people who'd chosen life over death, love over fear, hope over despair. I used to think snow was about ending, Lyrian said softly, about things dying and being buried. And now I think it's about new beginnings, about covering up the old world so a new one can grow. Cale kissed her temple, breathing in the scent of her hair. I love you, Mrs. Brennan. Mr. Brennan. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the snow fall and feeling the steady rhythm of each other's breathing. Two people who'd been buried by life and dug each other out. Two people who'd remembered together what it meant to be fully, completely, gloriously alive. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the world was being transformed by snow, made new and clean and full of possibility. Inside, two hearts beat in sync, warm and steady and unafraid. They had found each other in the cold, and they would keep each other warm for all the winters to come.